This is one of the latter. The room glittered with gold and ambition. Crystal chandeliers dangled like frozen waterfalls over the grand imperial ballroom. It was the kind of night where fortunes were made, alliances sealed, and reputations either soared or collapsed under the unforgiving gaze of New York's elite. At the center of it all stood one man, Arthur Vance. He was the very image of power. But tonight, Arthur had something, or rather someone, he was even more eager to show off. She was stunning in a backless silver gown that clung to her like liquid metal, her dark hair cascading in perfect waves. And she was most definitely not Arthur's wife. By the time Arthur took the stage to welcome his guests, the gossip had reached every corner of the ballroom. People weren't even trying to be discreet. Arthur basked in the attention like a cat in sunlight. He didn't just ignore the speculation. Near the Champagne Tower, one of the city's gossip columnists whispered to a friend, "She's going to hear about this, the poor thing." She was about to do much more than hear about it. Halfway through the evening, just as Arthur was launching into an over-rehearsed speech about family values and building legacies for the next generation, the massive double doors at the far end of the ballroom swung open. The music faltered, heads turned, conversation stopped mid-sentence. Her blonde hair, usually pulled into a simple bun, spilled over her shoulders in glossy waves. On her arm was a man, not just any man. Ethan Blackwell, the elusive billionaire investor whose net worth dwarfed Arthur's by billions. Tall, broad, and impeccably dressed in a midnight suit, Ethan's presence sent a ripple through the crowd. His eyes widened. He hadn't counted on her walking into his event, looking like the star of it, and certainly not with Ethan Blackwell at her side. Ethan leaned down and murmured something in Catherine's ear that made her laugh. When she finally did meet Arthur's gaze, there was no sadness, no pleading, no trace of the woman he'd been mocking behind her back for months. Composure. Arthur recovered enough to plaster on a grin that didn't reach his eyes. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, forcing a chuckle. A polite ripple of laughter moved through the crowd, but no one missed the tension crackling between them. Catherine stepped forward, her heels clicking against the marble floor, and took the microphone from his hand with a grace that was somehow both gentle and commanding. "Thank you, Arthur," she said, her voice clear and steady. "I wouldn't have missed this evening for the world." She turned to the audience, her smile bright, especially since Vance and Company wouldn't be here tonight without the generosity of our sponsors. "I'm honored to announce that this year's largest donor and new co-owner of the company is Ethan Blackwell." Gasps broke out. Co-owner. But everyone in the room knew the real story. Every camera in the room was capturing the image that would be on the front page tomorrow. And this was only the beginning. A woman who believed that love could conquer anything. She was born in a quiet New England town, the kind where everyone knew your name, and the biggest excitement was the annual fall festival. Her parents, Helen and David Reed, owned a modest hardware store and lived in a 3-bedroom colonial with a creaky front porch. Catherine inherited her mother's warmth and her father's determination. She excelled in school, earned a scholarship to a prestigious university in Boston, and majored in business administration. Not necessarily something flashy, but something she could build with integrity, something that would make her parents proud. He talked about his big dreams, the skyscrapers he wanted to build, the empire he intended to create. Their relationship moved quickly. Arthur showered her with attention, late-night phone calls, surprise dinners, and promises of a future where they'd take on the world together. Catherine, who had always been cautious in love, let herself believe she'd found a true partner. When Arthur proposed a year later, it wasn't in some grand showy gesture. They were having coffee at a little cafe near the harbor when he slipped a ring across the table saying, "Let's build our life together." In the early years of their marriage, Catherine was Arthur's confidant and sounding board. When his company began to grow, she was the one handling the small details he often overlooked. Scheduling, follow-ups, networking connections. The thoughtful gestures became rare, replaced by expensive gifts that felt more like apologies than affection. And when she discovered she was pregnant, she thought it might be the turning point they needed. The moment they'd reconnect, rebuild, and remember why they'd chosen each other. Morning sickness, fatigue, and the quiet anxiety of stepping into motherhood. Instead, he seemed to drift further away. The way he'd glance at his phone when she was talking, the business trips that didn't quite match the company's calendar. She tried to ignore it, chalking it up to stress, to the demands of his growing empire. Then came the cruelest cut, the gradual shift from neglect to mockery. Arthur began making little jokes at her expense in public, commenting on her comfortable maternity clothes, rolling his eyes when she declined wine at dinner parties, even joking to his friends that she was retired now. Catherine had given up a promising career trajectory, poured her time and energy into supporting him, and now he saw her as nothing more than a decorative accessory. She confided in her best friend, Leah, who had known her since college. "He's just blind, and one day he's going to regret underestimating you." What Arthur never realized, what no one in his circle realized, was that Catherine had never truly abandoned her own ambitions. She kept her business skills sharp through consulting work done discreetly under her maiden name. She was the silent owner of several prime properties, the majority shareholder in a boutique tech firm, and had quietly been building relationships with people like Ethan Blackwell, not romantically, but through shared philanthropic initiatives. Ethan, in particular, had been impressed by her sharp mind and strategic vision during charity board meetings. She didn't hide. She called Ethan. The world Arthur and Catherine lived in was not one of modest dinner parties or weekend getaways to the countryside. It was a high-stakes, high-visibility battlefield where perception was as valuable as profit. New York City's elite operated in a bubble. Every gala, charity auction, and industry conference was more than just a social gathering. Vance & Company had become one of the most visible players in that arena. Each project came with glossy PR campaigns, ribbon-cutting ceremonies, and exclusive previews for the city's power brokers. She attended the galas, smiled politely, and played the part of the supportive spouse. She listened more than she spoke, noted who could be trusted and who couldn't, memorized the power dynamics between key players. It was in that glittering yet cutthroat ecosystem that Ethan Blackwell moved like a ghost. Powerful, respected, but deliberately elusive. While Arthur sought the spotlight, Ethan seemed to own it without ever asking for it. His empire spanned multiple industries: renewable energy, shipping, aerospace technology. The meeting was in a penthouse conference room overlooking Central Park, the kind of setting where expensive suits and understated watches signaled more wealth than any logo ever could. Arthur hadn't been able to attend that day, something about a critical investor lunch, so Catherine had gone alone, representing the family's philanthropic contributions. Ever considered stepping into the business world yourself? Catherine had deflected at the time, laughing it off. Ethan was never flirtatious, never inappropriate, but he always listened, and he never underestimated her. He'd begun attending events with associates like Sienna, introducing them as valuable members of the team, while relegating Catherine to the periphery. Catherine had smiled. But inside, she'd filed it away as one more crack in the facade. That's why the Future Horizons charity ball was so important. It wasn't just another gala. Deals worth billions were known to be seated in casual conversations here. Arthur had been preparing for weeks, telling anyone who would listen that this would be his defining night. The venue itself was the Grand Imperial Ballroom, a place steeped in old money tradition. Towering ceilings painted with Renaissance-style frescoes, gold leaf detailing on every column, a stage flanked by marble staircases where the host could descend like royalty. The guest list read like a who's who of finance, real estate, and politics. Senators, tech moguls, art patrons, even a former president rumored to be considering another run for office. For Arthur, it was the perfect arena to display his dominance. For Catherine, it was the perfect stage to dismantle him. In the days leading up to the ball, Catherine had made her own quiet preparations. She arranged private meetings with key investors, some of whom had grown weary of Arthur's arrogance. And most importantly, she finalized the deal with Ethan to acquire a controlling interest in one of Vance and Company's most critical subsidiaries, a deal Arthur didn't even know was on the table. The night of the gala, as her driver navigated through the glittering streets of Manhattan, Catherine looked out at the city skyline. She didn't feel small looking at them anymore. When the car pulled up to the red carpet, reporters jostled for position. At first, they thought Ethan's presence was the story. He thought he was about to give the speech of his career. He had no idea the real show was about to begin. But beneath that polished exterior was a man obsessed with power. Every handshake was calculated, every dinner invitation a step toward another acquisition. In the early years of their marriage, Catherine had admired that drive. But over time, she realized Arthur's hunger for success wasn't about building something lasting. It was about feeding his ego. The more he climbed, the more he looked down on everyone else, including her. Arthur's need for validation was what led him to Sienna Clarke. She was a vision, tall, willowy, with a face that looked like it had been crafted for magazine covers. Her career as a model had peaked a few years earlier, but she'd reinvented herself as a luxury brand consultant, which in practice meant she was paid to mingle at high-end events and be seen in all the right places. Arthur met her at a private launch party for a luxury car brand. Catherine had been invited but had declined, citing exhaustion from her pregnancy. That left Arthur free to work the room alone, and he spotted Sienna by the champagne fountain wearing a red satin dress that all but demanded attention. They were a match in certain ways. It started discreetly. Late-night texts, business meetings that ran too long, a weekend trip to Miami for a development conference that didn't quite line up with any conference schedules. Catherine noticed the changes. The cologne he hadn't worn before. It wasn't just the affair that cut deep. At a dinner with investors, when she declined wine, he quipped, "Ah, she's in mom mode now. Doesn't get out much." At another event, when someone complimented her dress, he smirked, "She used to have a whole closet of those. Now it's all stretchy waistbands." Sienna, of course, played her role perfectly. At one charity brunch, she accidentally spilled coffee near Catherine's seat, apologizing with a tone that somehow made it sound like Catherine was the one in the way. But the most humiliating moment before the gala came 2 weeks earlier at a smaller industry event. Catherine hadn't been planning to attend, but a last-minute schedule change put her there. He didn't introduce Catherine to her. The way he said it, like Catherine was just another contact, not his partner, told her everything she needed to know. Catherine didn't respond. She thought Catherine was like the other discarded wives she'd seen in this world, women who faded quietly into the background while their ex-husbands paraded new partners. Arthur, too, miscalculated. He didn't see that the woman he'd been underestimating for months had positioned herself to land the single most devastating blow to his career. By the time the Future Horizons charity ball rolled around, Arthur was riding high. He told friends this was going to be the night we make history. And by we, he meant himself and Sienna. She had chosen a silver gown for the event, knowing it would sparkle under the chandeliers. He hadn't expected her to show up at all, let alone on the arm of Ethan Blackwell. His first instinct was to pretend it didn't matter, to act as though she was just there to play her part as his wife for the cameras. She was his competition, and she just outplayed him in front of the most powerful people in the city. The air inside the Grand Imperial Ballroom was thick with the scent of roses and expensive perfume. Champagne flutes clinked in delicate toasts, and the low hum of conversation swirled under the music from the string quartet. But for Catherine Vance, every second felt like walking through a minefield. Every step had been calculated, chin up, shoulders back, the faintest smile that gave nothing away. She'd shaken hands, accepted congratulations, and even made small talk with people she knew had been whispering about her for months. Still, she knew the moment of collision was coming. Sienna's silver gown caught the light, throwing sharp glints across the polished floor. She was laughing at something Arthur said, her hand resting on his arm in a way that declared possession. The moment Catherine stepped into his line of sight, a ripple passed through the group. Sienna's eyes narrowed, her expression flickering between surprise and calculation. "Catherine," Arthur said when she reached them, his voice pitched just loud enough for the nearby guests to hear. "You look unexpected." A polite chuckle went through the group, the kind of hollow sound people make when they sense drama but don't want to be caught openly enjoying it. "I could say the same," Catherine replied smoothly, letting her gaze sweep over Sienna before returning to Arthur. Sienna's smile froze. Arthur's eyes flashed, but before he could respond, one of the investors stepped in with a forced laugh, trying to steer the conversation back to business. But then came the toast. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, standing on the small stage with Sienna at his side. "I'm proud to have by my side someone who represents that future, someone who has brought fresh ideas, energy, and style to Vance & Company, Miss Sienna Clark." People glanced toward Catherine, gauging her reaction. She stood at a table near the front, her hand resting lightly on her champagne glass, her face unreadable. "In fact," he continued, "Sienna has been instrumental in our latest project. You'll be seeing much more of her in the months ahead." Catherine felt the heat rise in her chest, but she kept her expression cool. Let him think he'd won this round. Then Arthur made his mistake. The implication was clear: Catherine had stepped back, become irrelevant. That was when Ethan moved. Catherine took the microphone from Arthur without asking. Her voice when she spoke was steady, but the steel underneath was unmistakable. "Thank you, Arthur. It's true." She turned slightly, her gaze sweeping over the audience. "As of this morning, I am the majority shareholder of Vance & Company's residential division." Catherine smiled faintly. "I believe in the future of this company. That's why I'll be taking an active role in ensuring our projects reflect the values we claim to stand for." She didn't look at Sienna, but the silence from that side of the stage was deafening. Then she handed the microphone to Ethan. She wasn't the humiliated wife anymore. She was the woman who just outmaneuvered her husband on his own stage. Investors who had been circling Arthur now gravitated toward her, eager to shake her hand. Whatever victory they'd imagined for the night had evaporated, replaced by the cold reality that Catherine now held the upper hand, and everyone knew it. Ethan sat beside her, his expression unreadable, giving her the silence she needed. She'd stood in front of New York's elite and stripped Arthur of his unchallenged dominance. But the momentary rush of victory was already fading, replaced by something colder and sharper. Catherine managed a faint smile. "No, but that doesn't mean he won't retaliate." She knew Arthur too well. And now that she'd openly claimed a controlling interest in part of his company, she'd moved from being a personal embarrassment to a professional threat. When they reached her building, Ethan walked her to the door. The word felt foreign. Inside her penthouse, the quiet was oppressive. Her mind kept replaying every moment that had led here. The nights Arthur didn't come home. The jokes at her expense. The way Sienna had stood beside him tonight, owning a space that should have been hers. Even though Catherine had turned the tables, the wounds were still raw. But promises were easy to make in the quiet of her own kitchen. Arthur would likely call an emergency board meeting. He'd try to buy her out, paint her as an unfit investor, maybe even dig into her finances to find something he could use against her. By 3 o'clock in the morning, Catherine had abandoned the idea of rest entirely. She sat at her desk, a sleek glass slab in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows, and began drafting a list. Control the media narrative before Arthur could. She didn't need to ask who it was from. She deleted it without replying. By dawn, Catherine felt the exhaustion seep into her bones. She made tea, sat on the couch, and stared out at the skyline. A knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. It was Leia, holding 2 paper bags and a large coffee. "I figured you'd be up," she said, stepping inside. Catherine smiled for the first time in hours. They sat together in the kitchen, Leia unpacking fresh croissants and fruit. "You were incredible last night," she said between bites. Arthur looked like he'd swallowed glass. Catherine let out a short laugh. "It felt good for about 5 minutes. It's okay to crash after something like that. You've been holding it together for months. Now you need to think about what's next." "I already am," Catherine said, pushing her empty plate away. "I need to be ahead of him every step of the way." The idea settled in Catherine's mind. She'd been operating alone, leaning on Ethan for major moves. But if she was going to survive this, she needed people loyal to her. Not to Arthur, not to the company, just to her. Leia leaned forward. "Then do it. Don't forget to take care of yourself in all this. You're not just fighting for the company. You're fighting for you and that baby." Catherine placed a hand on her belly again. If anything, it had stripped away the last of her hesitation. She was done playing defense. Arthur believed that what happened at the gala was the endgame, that Catherine had played her single dramatic card by aligning with Ethan Blackwell and claiming a share of Vance and Company. What he didn't know was that the gala had only been Catherine's opening move. They'd heard the rumors that she'd staged a takeover with Blackwell's backing, that Arthur was furious, that the company was about to split into factions. She intended to make that choice easy for them. At the morning board meeting, Catherine laid out a detailed growth plan for the division. New sustainability initiatives, affordable luxury housing in emerging markets, strategic partnerships with tech firms to integrate smart living features. She wasn't a figurehead. She was a leader. In her office, a corner suite with sweeping views of the city, Catherine opened her laptop and logged into a secured account. Inside was a portfolio Arthur didn't know existed. It contained holdings in 3 international real estate firms, 2 boutique investment banks, and a controlling stake in a logistics company that supplied building materials to several of Vance and Company's competitors. These weren't Ethan's investments. They were hers. And now she was in a position to use those assets strategically. Leia arrived that afternoon with coffee and a grin. "I just heard from one of Arthur's guys," she said. Catherine smiled faintly. "Let him wonder." "Are you going to tell him?" Leia asked. "First, I want to see how he reacts when I start showing up in places he never expected me to be." That night, she attended a private dinner hosted by a major city developer, the kind of event Arthur considered his personal territory. She didn't do it through Vance and Company, but through one of her other companies, which promptly announced plans for a mixed-use development that would compete directly with Arthur's project. From silent partner to industry disruptor, Catherine Vance's stunning business moves, read one headline. Arthur's calls began coming in after that. First, they were polite requests to talk things through. Then, they turned sharper, accusing her of overstepping, of trying to sabotage him. Catherine listened without rising to the bait. The real bombshell came 2 weeks later. Cameras caught the moment, Arthur striding toward her, anger written across his face, and Catherine turning to greet him with a cool smile. "Nice to see you, Arthur," she said, her tone perfectly civil. "I hope you've been well." "I'm running my businesses," she replied. The footage went viral. The narrative was no longer, "Humiliated wife strikes back." It was, "Catherine Vance, rising power player." Ethan watched all of this with quiet approval. "You're building an empire." She didn't deny it. And the truth, the one no one but Leia and Ethan knew, was that she wasn't done. Her portfolio was larger than anyone suspected. Her alliances deeper, her plans longer term. Arthur thought he was fighting for survival now, but he still hadn't seen the full scope of what she had in her arsenal. The gala had been her opening move. The Catherine who had once slipped quietly into the background was gone. It began with her appearance. Catherine had always been elegant, but now she was deliberate. Her hair, once worn in soft waves or pulled into practical ponytails, now framed her face in sharp, sophisticated styles. Even her posture had shifted. Her shoulders squared, her chin lifted, every movement measured. But the transformation wasn't just external. She spoke in boardrooms with a calm authority that silenced interruptions. The headline read, "Catherine Vance, building more than towers, building a legacy." The article detailed her investments, her sustainability initiatives, and her commitment to affordable luxury housing, all while subtly contrasting her approach with Arthur's flashy, profit-first methods. It was a PR masterpiece, positioning her as the visionary and Arthur as the outdated mogul. Ethan remained a constant presence, though their relationship still lived in the realm of speculation. They appeared together at functions often enough to fuel rumors but never confirmed anything. He ramped up his own media appearances, increased the flashiness of his events, and paraded Sienna on his arm at every opportunity. But the more he tried to compete on her level, the more it became clear he was reacting, not leading. The contrast between them was stark. Catherine was shaping the narrative. Arthur was chasing it. Her speech was direct but inspiring, focused on innovation, sustainability, and community impact. She spoke about the need for the industry to evolve beyond pure profit to think about the future they were building for the next generation. Cameras flashed as she stepped down from the podium, shaking hands with other executives, some of whom Arthur had considered his inner circle. He smiled. She hadn't just rebuilt herself. The next move wouldn't just be about business. Billionaire investors flew in on private jets. The media covered it as if it were the Oscars of the business world. Arthur had been one of the gala's star attractions for years, using it to showcase his latest projects and charm potential partners. By the time Arthur stepped onto the stage at the gala, he didn't know that the very foundation of his project no longer belonged to him. The night of the gala, the ballroom shimmered with gold accents and crystal chandeliers. Cameras flashed as Catherine arrived with Ethan, wearing a sleek black gown with a plunging neckline and diamond earrings that caught every glint of light. She radiated power, calm, poised, utterly unshakable. And finally, Arthur took the stage. Construction begins in 6 months. That sponsor was Catherine's company. I'd like to share some exciting news. Catherine continued, her tone warm but firm. She paused, letting the words sink in. We look forward to collaborating with the city to ensure this project serves both economic growth and the people who live here. He knew what she'd just done. And she had done it in front of everyone who mattered. The room was buzzing, investors leaning toward each other, whispering. After the announcement, as Catherine stepped down from the stage, Arthur intercepted her near the edge of the ballroom. I already have, she cut in. And you should be careful, Arthur. The more you fight this, the more public it gets. And I think we both know who the press favors right now. She walked away before he could respond, joining Ethan in a cluster of international investors. By the end of the night, social media was ablaze with headlines. It was about making sure the entire world saw the transfer of power, about ensuring that his fall from grace was as public as the humiliation he'd once tried to inflict on her. And as she left the gala, flashbulbs popping around her, she knew one thing for certain. Arthur was finished. The photographs told the story even better, Arthur in the background, tense and grim, while Catherine stood poised, surrounded by allies. In her penthouse, Catherine sat at the breakfast table, sipping tea as sunlight spilled across the marble floors. The city skyline stretched out before her. Towers, bridges, and now a waterfront that would soon bear her name. She thought about how far she had come from that night months ago when she'd stood in the same city, feeling small, unseen, and humiliated. You've officially won, Leia said with a grin. Catherine shook her head. When she stepped out onto the stage, the applause was immediate and heartfelt. She began simply. I thought being loyal, quiet, and supportive was enough. And then one night, in front of a room full of people, I was reminded exactly how wrong I was. The room was silent, listening. I was mocked, dismissed, treated as though I had nothing to contribute, as though I was just decoration. Her gaze swept across the crowd. But here's the truth. No one can make you irrelevant unless you hand them the power to do so. And I realized that night I'd been giving away my power for years. I didn't take back my life by waiting for an apology, she said. I took it back by becoming the kind of woman who doesn't need one. She knew they understood. In the weeks after her speech, she received hundreds of messages from women across the world. As for Arthur, his empire began to crumble. The board questioned his leadership. Rumors swirled about internal disputes and financial instability. Catherine didn't gloat. She had learned the most satisfying form of revenge wasn't watching someone fall. It was rising so high that their opinion no longer mattered. Then came the announcement. It wasn't made through a press release or a staged magazine cover. The room erupted. Social media lit up within minutes, power couple alert. Catherine Vance and Ethan Blackwell engaged. It wasn't ostentatious. As she walked down the aisle, sunlight caught the tears in Leia's eyes. Ethan stood waiting, looking at her like she was the only person in the world. I used to think my story ended the night I was humiliated in front of a crowd. But that night was just the prologue. And I promised to protect that, always. Ethan's vows were simple. I don't complete you. I stand beside you, always. They sealed it with a kiss as the guests rose in applause. The menu was curated by Michelin star chefs. She was no longer just Catherine Reed or Catherine Vance. She was a woman who had taken her life back on her own terms, and in doing so, had built a legacy of resilience for the daughter she now held in her arms. Her story became a legend whispered in boardrooms and told over glasses of champagne at elite gatherings. Because Catherine had learned the truth. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder of their own incredible strength. And don't forget to subscribe, because we believe everyone has a powerful story inside them, and we're here to tell the ones that inspire you to live yours to the fullest.